Williamson. I'm a junior undergrad here at Yale, and I worked for Dr. Aronson in the bioanthro lab. And so I've kind of been the understudy osteologist, more or less, and when this project came around, kind of got put on it. And a lot of times people ask me, what do you do, why do you do it, those kinds of things. And so, for me, it's really cool. But also, bones themselves are very, very useful in determining lots of different things. So, first of all, bones always withstand time. You can find bones almost at any archaeological site. Any of human remains, those are what you're going to find. The soft tissues generally deteriorate before you can get to them. And so we usually have bones left. And you can see this here, some of you may be familiar with. This is Lucy. So she has been dated back over 3 million years. So that is just how long bones can last. Also, another interesting thing about bones is they live with you more or less. And so things that happen to you also happen to your bones. And you get certain signatures and indicators that are left on your bones. So anybody who's ever broken a bone will have a different marker. These are our osteoarthritic changes. So I'm a pitcher on the softball team. And so I know that my shoulder will look significantly different than anybody else's who doesn't run around in a circle 300 times a week. So basically what we do as osteologists is first we have to get an inventory of what we have. So we collect remains, all those kind of things, and then bring them back to the lab, lay them out on the table and say, okay, this is what we have. We always expect 206 bones, but rarely does that ever happen. We generally get a lot of fragments. We get upper body, only the lower body, one half of the body. We just get a few fragments here and there. Sometimes we only get teeth. So that's kind of all over the board as far as what we get out of this specific dig. Next, we try and age the individual. We have the proper elements. So a lot of the limb bones and the long bones are what are the most useful. The cranium is also useful, and teeth. But I'll get into that a little bit later. So in this particular case, we use the clavicle and the suture found on the underside of the skull to age our one individual. And then after you determine its age, we move into sex. So you can determine the sex, or it's very, very difficult to determine the sex until a person has reached puberty, because the secondary sex characteristics don't quite show up on the bones at that point. So what we use, the two best areas to use are your innominate, or your pelvic bones, and then your skull. So we didn't have anything in the pelvic area, we just had the skull. So the two that we use mostly are the mastoid process, which is right behind your ear, you can actually feel it, and the mental eminence, which is presence of the chin. So males generally have larger mastoid process C's than females, same with the chin. Males generally have a bigger chin than females. Next, another idea that we can look at into, as long as we have a complete limb bone or long bone, is a stature estimation. And so we take the length of generally the femur and the tibia work best, don't always get those. So in this case, we tried to use the humerus and the radius, and when I say estimate, I mean estimate because we didn't have full bone, so we were estimating on top of that. So sometimes that's useful, you stick it into a formula that kind of spits out a number for you, you can kind of get a general idea of the overall size of the person. Later, we have to look a little more closely at the bones and spend a lot of time staring over them, hoping to find something. A lot of times people ask, how did they die? Wanting to know trauma, bullet wounds, things like that, but very rarely do you ever find those indications of trauma. So a lot of times we're looking more for pathologies and illnesses, indicators of disease. And so you can see here, this is periosteal bone growth. So this is just kind of a generalized reaction to some sort of infection. This is a child's skull, and this is called purpura orbitalia, which is a bony reaction to anemia. So as I talked about earlier, I mentioned teeth briefly. Teeth are almost always present also, in addition to bones. If anything, the teeth are going to be there. So they're really durable, and they withstand time even longer than the bones do. They're really useful for aging individuals. You look and see which elements are present, but how far they're developed, things like that. All humans undergo the same developmental pattern. So the teeth erupt at more or less the same pattern. So you can judge an age based on which teeth you have and how far they erupted, root formations, things like that. And they're also really indicative of health and nutritional status. So the way teeth form, they start from your crown and grow all the way down to the root. And your body lays down enamel every 7 to 10 days, 2 weeks or so. And so it goes through. And so all of our teeth in here are generally very, very smooth, unless you had some traumatic incidents, as you were growing. So these are always on permanent teeth, by the way. And we get what we call, I don't know, because this is part of the... Sorry. So we get these linear enamel hypoplasias, which are these lines along here. And so because of the way the tooth forms, that it starts at the top and moves to the bottom, it's also helpful for determining when these events happen. So you can see, this is an adult here, you can see some of these lines down here. And then these are kid teeth, both right here. So you can see here, the life of this child is pretty good until you get a few events in here. And then for this kid, things are looking pretty good, and then something very, very dramatic happens in there. So teeth are just really useful for a number of things, and they're always present, so it's very, very helpful to have them. So, applying it all, so for this particular case, we have 6 to 7 individuals, 2 adults for sure, 3 kids, and a number of fragmentary remains that just don't give us much information, but everything we have is more or less partial. So you can kind of see, so this is a tree upended, and this is where we found A, so it was the detective on the case there, and then B, B was found right underneath A, then we was C who was underneath the base of the monument, so that's where the monument was, and then D is another adult partial skeleton there. E is hanging up in here, we found that a little bit later, and then F is down in that corner, and then possibly G, it was bagged with it doesn't quite fit, so we're still unsure of where it all goes together. So this is individual A, this is the one everybody heard about in the news, this is the one that makes everybody really excited. So we have the majority of the skull, as you could have seen in the other pictures, and most of the upper body through here, fragmented ribs, things like that, but the majority of the vertebrae. You can see with this is the mental eminence that I was talking about earlier, so we've decided that he is most likely male. We've also aged him somewhere between 25 and 30 based on suture fusion in his skull and on this medial platform right here, the collarbone. Another interesting part about this individual is we have hair and tissue preserved. So you can see this green copper staining here. So there's some kind of copper pin something there, and that changes the process of decomposition, and so it actually preserves the tissue much better. Right underneath A, as you saw, we found individual B, who is actually very poorly represented. We only have a few elements for this guy. Small fracture of the mandible, and then you can kind of see close up of the teeth that are present. So you can see all these teeth that are moving through and pushing these teeth. That's how we aged him. And then you can also see this arrow is pointing to a wear facet, which is, this is his first permanent molar, and so that means his teeth were in occlusion. He was chewing on them, and so that's where you get those facets from. So taking all that into account, we'll put him somewhere between the 7 to 9 years of age. We're thinking that this is possibly male based on the morphometrics of this canine here, but it's still very difficult to tell, and the research is still being done as to how accurate that is. Next, we found individual C. So we mentioned finding him underneath the base of the monument, and by underneath I mean under the base of the monument. We excavated him from cement. So his remains are pretty fragmented. Few vertebrae down here, but other than that, mostly just cranial. We also have some hair and tissue for this individual as well. Based on teeth, age 3 to 4, same thing. Possible male, also based on this one canine. Individual E is our most well-represented juvenile skeleton. It looks very fragmentary, but really, considering it's a child, it's pretty complete. Lots of cranial fragments again, and this mandible through here, decent number of teeth. Hair and tissue again, thinking that this is a little bit lighter in color than the others, based on teeth eruption, dental eruption of 3 to 4, and then possible female based on the shape of the clavicle. And then we move into the really fragmentary individuals. We know that for sure that D is his own individual because he was so far away from everything else. But other than that, we don't really know. This is the scapula here, the shoulder, and the humerus, the rest of the arm, and this is the distal humerus, so this is the back of the elbow. This is individual F, so this is a single cranial fragment that we have. And then G was bagged with E, but it looks to be more adult than child. So we're just calling him another individual, but really don't have a whole lot to say. We're thinking that they're forelimb fragments, but they're so fragmentary, it's very difficult to tell.